MaximumFun.org.
So I make music and I don't normally talk. And when I do stand on stage, it tends to be like 11 p.m. and people are drunk, not full of coffee, and not coming from an hour and a half of having like an expert tell them about something, and then I ramble on for an hour about nothing. So if we could just start by putting both our hands in the air as high as they can possibly go, and try to imagine that your shoulder and the palm of your hand are in a fight, and try to get them as far away as possible. Really just let's close our eyes, and now let's pick one hand to put down, just one hand to put down. And now while your eyes are closed, let's face the palm of our hand towards our face, and let's have our head look towards our palm. Let's open our eyes and stare into the center of the palm of your hand. And now, as slow as you possibly can, start moving your hand closer and closer to your face. Like as slow as glue sliding down like a 5-degree sandpaper incline, like real slow. And imagine your hand is one of the face huggers from Alien. And it's moving, in reality it's moving, faster than you can even perceive. But the facehugger excretes an enzyme that makes you perceive time differently. And it's moving so slow, and it's a way that you can't even imagine because you've always perceived time in the same way. But now because of this enzyme, you're still perceiving it at the same speed that you're used to, but everything's moving super slow. So you feel it's just like, this feels kind of cool. But at the same time, it's this horrible stress because you know what the facehugger is going to do. It's going to latch onto your face and impregnate you with a being that's going to burst out of your chest and you're going to die. But since it's moving so slow, you can really, tell what's happening, and it's moving closer and closer to your face, and it's also excreting a second enzyme, and you're smelling them. They're smell enzymes. I don't know if enzymes work that way, but you're smelling them, and it's getting closer and closer, and you can see it has eyes on its underbelly that you didn't know about because it's normally looks like a horseshoe crab or whatever, and you can tell that it feels like shit for what it's doing to you, but it knows it has to do it. It's just like, and it doesn't have a mouth, but you can tell it's sorry, and right before it latches its talons around your neck and squeezes against your face and impregnates you, it just says, "I'm so sorry." And you're the last thing you ever say is, "It's okay, I understand." And now let's just press our hand against our face as hard as we possibly can. Let's keep it there for the next 45 minutes. And if we could just, while our hand is on our face, if you could just repeat after me. This is a new scenario now. It's no longer a face hugger. It's just your regular hand again. If you could just repeat after me. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. You were right. I never should have coated my entire apartment in glue. I just loved the sheen. But now, I'm trapped in this glue. And if I try to move, the glue is so strong that it tears my bones away from my muscle. I'm surely going to die. But that's not why I'm leaving you this voicemail. I want you to know that I've chosen you amongst all my iPhone favorites to call as life bleeds from my body. My last request is for you to be the steward, the keeper and protector of my most prized possession. Deep in my vaults, the vaults you are familiar with, you will find the Criterion edition of Austin Powers 3. Gold member. Okay, so I think we can start. Thanks for humoring me. So I think a lot about how a performer thinks of an audience and an audience thinks of an audience. I think of an audience when I'm on stage as one collective mass of consciousness, like you're all working together to destroy me. And I think an audience thinks of themselves as a group of individuals without this collective consciousness. And I could be wrong about this, but I think that shift is very important. And I think people think about that, or don't think about it, but that back and forth happens constantly in your life. Whether you're like the craziest libertarian or the most like out there like commune member, you're always an individual and you're always the member of a collective. There's no one exists in either. I don't care who you are. That was pointless. Anyway, so what I'm trying to get at is you think about what it means to be a performer, what it means to be an audience, and what that relationship is. And you could go to a show and the performer can just totally suck, but if the audience is good, it's still a good show. And you can, the reverse, you can go to a show and a band can just be slaying it and the audience can suck and the show will totally suck. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I think we've all experienced this. So I started thinking about what the role of the audience is and how they think of it. And that's sort of like how my shows go. So like on the boat and probably tonight when I'm a little drunk, when I'm DJing, we'll do some of this, but I'd like to try some of it now. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but at first we'll talk about the future. But before we talk about the future, we have to pretend like we know about the past. So let's talk about the past first. And there was this shift in like the late 1800s where like people started being like, maybe religion's kind of bullshit, but I really like ceremonies and I like when something's fancy because it's, you know, this like importance and I don't want to lose that, but I don't want to go to church. What are we going to do? And then someone was like, we can put it into the theater. We can make the theater like really falsely important. We can make opera like really important and we can yell at people if they talk. And everyone that made like opera and theater was like, yes, I want to be the new god. Let's do that. This is great. Let's stop selling beer and turkey legs at concerts. They didn't call them concerts back then. At the symphony and at the theater, and it'll be people who think we're the new Christ. This is great, and we can still pretend like we like the old Christ, but this is better. So that happened. And all of a sudden, it went from like you'd go to something and it wouldn't matter if you talked. You'd literally be able to buy like, it'd be like sports, and sports were so much more similar to like theater and the symphony or opera or whatever than it used to be. And I feel like we're getting back to that. And part of that is really horrifying, and part of that I think is really awesome. Like I really would love the idea of going to see like Wagner and somebody be like, 2 turkey legs over here. Can we get them, please? Dickhead, let's go. Come on. That guy's had like 6 times you've been around. I've had no turkey legs. Come on. And I hope it doesn't go back to that for the sake of just, you know, the farming industry that would just be bombarded by this turkey leg phenomenon. But I like the idea of the audience being like, this isn't this reverent environment and I can just be myself and I don't have to like have this like sanctity to it. But I also am one of these dickheads who really likes the sanctity of performance. Do you know what I mean? So I started thinking, so again, I like sat down. I feel like I'm like trying to sell you something at the end. So I have this one weird trick that bands hate. Anyway. So you look at, I like to think of like that time period where we started imposing all these rules where you, for the first time, you get shushed for like talking at an event. And they would stop selling confections during the event and they wouldn't let you in once the event started. Like, granted, that's like 150 years old, but at some point that was new and people were like, what the fuck are you, I came here on a horse. Anyway, so you look at it and it went from like, pretty much just basic, you know, anarchy. And by anarchy, I mean like actual anarchy where there were like, you know, assumed rules. Like no one was standing up and being like, no, let me play a couple. So like there were sort of, you know, there was like a set of norms that existed. And then it went insanely strict. And then I think because of that you had, I think jazz really helped grow out of that because there was like, can we please just make music fun? Can we like have a good time while we're playing music? It was just like, you know, let's take these like musical instruments that exclusively dickheads use. I'm going to say dickheads a lot. I'm sorry if Jesse, your kids are in the room. But you were cursing a lot yesterday, so I realized it was okay. Let's take these instruments and let's bring them down here. Let's have a good time. And from there, you know, obviously that influenced rock and roll. And you look at the very early days of rock and roll. If you look at like an old rock and roll concert, and old rock and roll concerts used to like go to like really weird small towns, like probably towns like this, rather than Los Angeles. And it would be like Johnny Cash and Chuck Berry and like all these dudes, and people would just sit in chairs silently, and then when the band was done, they'd be like, "That's great, I loved that," and people would be like, "These people are fucking Satanists. This is crazy," and then 5 years later, people would scream the entire time, just scream. I know you all know this, but just basically, I'm going to explain how arithmetic works, but just bear with me. So 5 years later, people would still sit in chairs and they would just scream. They would just scream the entire time the band was playing. And the people who started going to shows and socialized before that were like, what are these dickheads doing? Why are they screaming the whole time? But the younger people who didn't have that prior knowledge, they socialized into an environment where you go to shows and you scream. You just scream the whole time you watch the band, and that's how you show you're having a good time. And then 5 years later, probably maybe 10 years later, people stood up and screamed. And that was, again, crazy to the generation prior. It was like, why the fuck are you standing? They put all these nice seats out. Can we please just sit down and scream as loud as we can in our seats? And then people started being like, these seats suck. I want to dance. Let's go to the front and stand in the balcony pit area. And then venues started realizing like we shouldn't put these seats. And then people would be like, I miss the old days of the seats. This sucks. All these young people with these fucking bullshit no seats. And then from there, dancing became sort of like, let's just bump into each other as hard as we possibly can. Let's just have no regard for being in a body and no physical form and slam around as hard as we can. And that was awesome if you were just learning how to go to shows like that. But if you didn't go to shows like that, you were already taught that when you go to a show, you dance and you scream. The new slamming into a person and having to catch someone jumping off of a stage, that was a bit unnerving. So that was, again, another step. And this is the big jump. And this is where, if you want to call bullshit, you definitely can. And then people started having tons and tons of little computers in their hands and pockets at all times. And now everyone's thinking, oh, this sucks. Why do all these people have these fucking phones? But in my mind, the phone is the same thing as the mosh pit. It sucks if you went to shows and it didn't exist when you were 13. But if you're 13 now, you don't care. It doesn't matter. It's there and it's never going to be there. You're never going to be like, all right, guys, let's get serious. Can we, there's a bin at the front, just put your phone in it and we'll pick them up at the end. But it's, how do you create this environment where people can utilize their phones and it doesn't suck? I feel like any prohibition that exists is always going to result in, one, horrible outcomes and people are not going to stop doing it, and two, just like the worst possible environment of just like people becoming police for other people. And I kind of think that exists. And granted, there's environments that shouldn't have phones in them, but there's also environments that shouldn't have total creeps in them. And obviously total creeps exist and we're trying to stop that as well, but it's not working. Anyway, so I guess the point I'm trying to make is if you think about like, I don't know, what are there, 200 people in this room? There's probably 150 like individual computers. And what can you do when you have 150 little computers that are also video cameras and still cameras and light forces, they're forces of light, and speakers and microphones? And how do you use them? And what kind of art can you make when you have this collective body of instruments? But currently people only think of phones as something you do like this, or like, dude, check out this hilarious Twitter. It's Zonk. Check out this Zonk Twitter. Or you go like this and the person behind you gets upset. But there's very little instance where people go like this and you use your phones in a collective way. And so a couple of friends and I started doing that, and I started thinking like, oh my God, we're going to destroy all performance. We're going to be the people who 50 years from now, they're going to be like, and unfortunately, what they thought was the cure to cancer brought upon the zombie revolution. But I started thinking, like, why are all of the types of performance that exist, why do they require like this? Why do we all have to sit in this direction and look at some like narcissistic jerk talk about something he doesn't know about? And I started thinking, well, it's because of the limitations of the technology at the time. But I feel like now we exist in this time period where we all have these means of creating these performerless performances and creating these pieces of art that would never have been able to make before because of the non-existence of the technology. Like the same way that electronic music obviously didn't exist in the 1700s because neither did electricity. I don't know. But we live in a time period now where we can create these spatial environments of sound where every person's phone is a different speaker. So we could have a 200-point stereo. We could have a crazy light show. But how do you make that art form? How do you have that like infantile period where it's like, no, seriously, come to my house and no one's going to play music and we're not going to have a DJ, but we're just going to look at our phones. But we're not going to look at them in like that way that sucks. We're going to look at them in this way that could be cool. how do you eventually, hopefully 25 years from now, make it so that like instead of going to like the Verizon Center, which hopefully isn't called the Verizon Center anymore, but how do you go to like I don't even know what you would call it, because I guess like Carnegie Hall was also like the Verizon Center of the time. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense? So it's not like I always kind of think that we live in like the worst age, or maybe we do. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. Anyway, got to channel the smart Lawrence Wusa. So I guess that's what I keep thinking about is how can you make an audience also the performers without going over the line of, there's a fine line, let's imagine this is the fine line in the stage where there's interactivity and then there's chores. And people don't like doing chores, or especially being told to do chores when you don't want to do chores. Like when I was a kid and I'd come home and I'd forget that it was time to put out the recycling, it'd be like, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But when someone's like on stage and it's like, can you take out the recycling right now? Can you take, hey, what do you say this guy takes out the recycling, everybody? That's being a horrible bully to that guy. And I loved interacting with the crowd and picking people out, but I hate the idea of being like, hey, do you have a social anxiety that I don't know about? No, come on, forget all about it. We're going to have fun watching you feel socially awkward on stage. So that's part of the problem. I know I've jumped quite a bit, and now I'm no longer talking about the new art form that I kind of want to capitalize on. But where was? Oh yeah, the dynamic of performance, interaction, and chore. So, because ultimately, when you go to something, you want to be entertained. Like when people talk about interactive movies, and it's like, and then at some point, they're going to give you a button and you're going to get to choose if they go through this way or they go through that way. And it's like, wow, I can't think of a better way to just entirely ruin cinema. I don't want to make a choice. I don't want to have to sit, because all I'm going to do is sit there and be like, I picked the wrong fucking thing, man. This sucks. Now I'm going to have to come back and pick it again, and this is bullshit. But I also like the idea of what used to be fixed, time-based art not being fixed. Like when I was a little kid, I loved watching The Wind in the Willows, like the animated version of The Wind in the Willows. It made it so I never had to read the book. If there is a book, I don't know. But I always wanted it to end differently, and I thought if I just watched it enough, it would end differently. And I remember listening to Rocky Raccoon by the Beatles, and there's a character in the song named Dan who, if you haven't heard the song, spoiler alert, he kills Rocky Raccoon. And sorry. This was very traumatic for me as a child, because I was like, maybe if I listen to it now, they'll be buds, and this is fine. Or maybe they'll just understand that there's more dynamics in relationships than just monogamy, and it's going to be fine. It doesn't matter. That didn't happen either. But I also like the idea of this breathing medium, and I feel like for the 20th century was when fixed art came about, when it was like, because you think of a play, even though it's going to be like the same form every night, they're not going to be like, let's throw in the secret scene tonight, guys. What do you think? People are going to go wild. But there's nuance to it, and there's change. And not to say that's good or bad. It's just different from how recorded music works and how cinema works. And cinema was obviously the art form of the 20th century that came about and was like, all your art forms bow down to us. We are all your art forms, asshole. But it doesn't breathe at all. It stays exactly the same, and it never changes. And music had this like dual thing happened where it became fixed, where it became a record, where it had to be digestible in short periods of time, where 20 minutes was like the maximum people would tolerate, because they could only buy music that lasted 20 minutes on an LP. And you saw the composers that were embracing that really gained, like Stravinsky was the only one that was like, wait a minute, if I make my symphonies 20 minutes, I can sell them on records, where other people would be like, no, I don't care. This is going to die out. This sucks. No one wants records. Obviously, people really wanted records. Well, not anymore. But it changed the way that people thought about music. But music lived this dual life of being this like living, breathing, constantly changing art that could be performed night to night, that could be modified, that could be extended, that could be shortened, that could take the audience's reaction into account. Where if you went to a show and the audience was wilder than you thought, you could play faster and louder and sloppier. If you went to a show where the audience was very timid, you could change your set, you could do whatever you wanted. And it really, and that's why I think I'm talking about this so much, is because the audience was the most important part. You take a piece of film and you show it to an audience that doesn't stand there watching a a comedy, and it's a real sad experience. It's just awful to watch a bunch of people not understand that they're watching a comedy, which I'm sure we've all experienced. Maybe it's happening right now. But it was a fixed art form. It was a product of industrialization and mass production. We don't exist in that time right now. Like if we were all to like Google search, I don't know, I can't stop thinking of the movie Faithful Findings. If we were all to Google search Faithful Findings, we'd have completely different results because they're all tailored exactly to us in our previous histories and what weird pornos we look at or don't look at, or like what news we read. Maybe you don't even use Google, which is crazy, but I know people do it because the companies are worth billions of dollars. So maybe you're going to Bing or Yahoo, and everything that I digest, or even like our Facebooks, are radically homogenized, but at the same time completely and radically different. Everything is customized exactly for us down to the T, except for art. There's very little art that's user generated or not user generated, but user curtailed. There's also very little art that's made for mass digestion, but not the same experience. You never go to like a movie and be like, how did your movie end? I know I was sitting right next to you, but like, no, they all lived. You're crazy. And that might suck. It's definitely going to suck. It's especially for us, because it's going to be this new art form and we're going to hate it. But there's no way it's not going to happen. But how do you create, like, the thing that I keep thinking is, you think of like the radical fluxus art of the 70s, which definitely led to like Flaming Lips, Zyreka, and the boombox performances and stuff that they did, and like those things are awesome. They also happened in the 70s. That doesn't really matter. I hate when someone's like, but that's been done before. Like if you do something once, it can like never happen. It's like, I brushed my teeth when I was 8. Now I'm done. I don't need to do it again. Maybe you could get better at brushing your teeth and take an idea that happened once and do it like 25 times, and it will be good. Not that those things weren't good. Now I just feel like an asshole. Anyway, I keep thinking about, again, going back to phones, because they're definitely, taking away from a concert. And I love seeing like something on like Tumblr where it's like a picture of someone taking a picture at a concert and being like, this asshole is just taking pictures of their second row of Bruce Springsteen, and all they're doing is watching it through their camera. And I just think like, you're 8 rows of Bruce Springsteen and you're watching someone take pictures at a Bruce Springsteen concert. That's the most beautiful thing I could ever imagine. You're such like a cynical bastard that you can't even appreciate something because someone's appreciating it different from you. And I think that's really amazing and magical, that like, just because someone's like, imagine if they just had like a little card, like a Joker card, and they're like just holding this Joker card up, but someone would be like, put that fucking card down. I can't stop looking at your beautiful card. Anyway, so we're going to be in this time. There's no end to the prohibition of technology in performance. And I think, going back to like cinema and theater, like you're never going to meet someone that you like respect or think is smart that's going to be like live tweeting Godzilla like at the event, because even if it's like the most hilarious takedown critique of how shitty Godzilla was, which it was, you're never going to be like, but why did you have your phone out the whole movie? Didn't that just distract everyone around you? Didn't that suck? And I can't think of a theater environment that would exist where phones would work. They're designed to be like, you go to a movie to be immersed, to be taken out of like your horrible, stress-filled life and to be put into somebody else's horrible, stress-filled life, which is hopefully more horrible and more stress-filled, so you can feel better when you're leaving. Like, thank God I'm not like Bryan Cranston's character in Breaking Bad. Like, I used to not watch that show because of all the anxiety it gave me, and then I was like, my life is like a walk in the park compared to this asshole. This is great. And when I was watching Godzilla, I was like, can I talk about Godzilla for a little bit? Is that fine? I know there's no structure to this. Anyway, let's not talk about it. It sucked. Anyway, I think there should trying to loop this back around. I think if you think of the new paradigm shifts in performance as positive aspects rather than negative aspects, and you remove that prohibition, it opens up a lot of opportunity for what could be radically new forms of art. And like, just imagine if like, in the, maybe this did exist, in the early 90s, just mosh clubs opened where bands didn't play and there weren't DJs, and it was sort of like a weird gym for like people who weren't athletic. And you just went and you moshed, like, and you'd like, it'd be like 8 in the afternoon, and you'd go and you would just like mosh, and you'd be like, oh, great moves in the pit. And you'd like maybe have some sort of like collective insurance. Maybe you'd start an LLC. I don't know. But just think of like the kids that would go to that, and then they'd be like, yeah, and then I went to school for dance, and I don't like dancing, but I really like moshing. I'm going to have people over for dinner, and then afterwards we're going to move the furniture, and we're not going to play any music, and we're just going to mosh. That didn't happen. Not that it couldn't. We're going to do it tonight in one of the beautiful rooms here. But I feel like phones are that, and I feel like it would be a shame if phones just became exclusively like tracking devices and like things to just hoard information so that they can figure out how to sell us toothpaste better or how to make us feel worse about our bodies. I feel like they're these amazing, amazing instruments, and if you look at like radio and television and computers or the internet and everything, they're always so instantly co-opted by major corporations or funded or created by them. I mean, obviously you couldn't have had television without like hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of funding to create them. But ultimately from them came all of the art forms that I think we most love. Like the people, like there wouldn't be podcasts if there wasn't radio. And if there wasn't radio, there wouldn't have been the whole art form of the radio show. And if there wasn't radio, there wouldn't have been the whole renaissance of folk music becoming like the most popular music in the world. There wouldn't have led to all of the artifacts and things that like became these like spur-offs that were subcultures that became mainstream cultures. But I feel like the phone is still just this thing where it's like, I've got this app idea where it shows you where all the Walgreens are that have all the products that you favorite on Facebook. And it will not benefit society in any capacity. It won't have any cultural relevance, but I'm going to sell it for like $800,000. And then I'm going to pretend that I'm a philanthropist and a great person. But what kind, like, I keep thinking this is like the most exciting time to be alive as an artist, because especially if you're in your 30s, because if I don't tell myself that, I get really depressed. I like going, this is like obviously my safe spot. If you haven't noticed, I've been doing this a lot, and I'm sorry that I've been doing that. Anyway, so I keep thinking like, because there's all these like terrible, like, when they be interviewing like Bob Moog or like Buchla, they'd be like, do you think Beethoven would use your instruments if he was alive today? And most of them, they're humble guys, and they're like, oh, I'd hope so. That would be great. Of course he fucking would. Are you joking? The guy was just like, what do you mean? Like, it can get quiet and loud. This is amazing. I think like any composer wants to work with like any sound source they can possibly make, and anyone who's just like, oh, electronic music, that's cute, but I work only in the realm of acoustic instruments. Those people don't exist. So to think about, or to someone be like, no, my music will never be broadcast on the radio, for it's meant only for the vibrations that come out of the instruments and directly into the human body. Give me a fucking break. Person that doesn't exist, I hate you. Anyway, but I feel like phones still have this like, because they're kind of like your shitty drunk friend who's also real smart. You don't want to invite him to hang out because he's like just gonna alienate your other friends, but how can you just get this guy to be cool? Like, what are you gonna do? I just keep thinking like, it reminds me of the musicians that when recorded music came out had like protests against it. And when people were like, there can be no pre-recorded music at movie theaters. Canned music is dead music and no one will like it and it will suck. And that's crazy. That's so, can you imagine going to exclusive, granted it would be great if that still existed at all. It does, I'm gonna go back to my safe space. It does suck when a new art kills an old art form, which it would be the, live accompaniment to movies, or how movies completely killed theater and how internet, like just maybe poetry's coming back, but let's get real. How can you make a new art form that doesn't disenfranchise the old one? But also, how do you not completely just set up this prohibition or set up this hatred towards a device or towards a whole mindset of technology? Especially when it already is, it's entering the room like the drunk friend at a dinner party. Like cell phones came in being like, what's up? I suck. I'm ruining the show. Check me out. No one likes this. You all have one too. You're going to do it. All right. See you guys later. And everyone's like, God damn it. That is me. And I hate that guy. But I keep thinking like, wouldn't it be great if, I'm going to go back to the Flaming Lips, if they put out a piece of music that you needed 45 people to listen to and you couldn't listen to it without 45 people. It'd be nice to go back to a time period where music wasn't just furniture music, where you could put on a record and you would sit there and listen to it with the same attention that you gave a book, or that you gave a movie, or that you gave a movie when you're in the theater, or that when you gave a band when you're watching them live, which maybe bands don't get, but we like to think that we do. But how can you take music that's been this furniture thing for about 100 years? Music never used to have that sort of like a throwaway nature. And if I have no idea what time it is or when I should stop. So just get up and go when it becomes lunch. Before the mass production of music or to be able to broadcast it through the air, if you didn't play music yourself or live within earshot of someone who played music, it never happened to you. And then even if someone was just like, oh, I've got a story to tell, you'd be like, shut up and listen to this guy. It's music. It's not just like regular talking. This is going to be great. Just shut the fuck up. I don't care if it's just like the same song with different words. It doesn't matter. I just want to hear some goddamn music. And then all of a sudden, it just became like, oh God, just music is. My studio. I have to walk past a Hess station, and they play the gas station radio network, which I guess only plays at Hess. And I don't know why they don't call it like the Hess radio network. They act like it's this big. Oh no, all the gas stations are playing it. It's great. But I hate that I have to listen to this bullshit as I walk down the street, and I'm like, I'm so happy that I hate music, and I'm going to my studio to make more of it. And I love that there's more music made every day that like anyone could ever listen to in 1,000 lifetimes. But it also makes it this disposable art where you only listen to it when you're like mowing the lawn or driving in your car or in the background or at a party. It's never like, dude, I got the new Lana Del Rey album and I turned off all the lights and I sat in my most comfortable chair. I put it on my stereo, closed my eyes, and the record sucked. But I gave it the opportunity to be fully appreciated without distraction. I wasn't just playing chess with friends the whole time, and I wasn't looking at Instagram. I was actually trying to pretend that music is still an art form that you can appreciate without something else happening to it. So anyway, I think often about like, well, furniture music is also awesome as well. I love that music can exist in this environment where you're not paying attention to it at all. You don't care that it's there, but if it turns off, you're like, dude, this party sucks. What's going on? Well, it'd be almost like if someone just like put heaters everywhere and just like a badly hurt dog, you'd be like, what's happening at this party? Well, who hurt the dog? And the music, and the moment the music comes on, it instantly becomes better, and it doesn't even matter if it's good. But if it's good, it dominates, and it becomes like something that's super important. And not only I'm back over here now, I was here, but I really miss the idea and the time when people would, and maybe I'm pandering to my audience. But just sitting around and listening to audio. It's all you're doing is listening to audio. You're using your brain to take sound and then using that sound to let your brain run wild. Like my favorite part about music is that it's an art form where I can both escape reality and also escape into my own brain. And like I love like going back and being like, oh, the music is doing this. I'm listening to music, but I'm not just like turning off my brain and just like thinking like, oh, that's a third. Okay, now they're throwing in some jazz shit. Okay, cool. Oh, listen to that modulation. Like not the way that I watch a movie and I'm watching a movie and it's just sort of like, oh, this is awesome. They're blowing everything up. This is great. I remember that guy from the other scene. He's a bad guy because he's got like a ugly face or something. But with music, it's like the only time, if I do give it that sort of like sanctity that I hated before, it allows me to like think and to do things and to use my imagination. And I feel like a lot of times that doesn't happen. And I think, even when I love these podcasts, let's get real, but I'm often listening to them when I'm doing something else where it's like, all right, I got to drive 8 hours. I might as well just listen to somebody talk. I find it rare where I'm like, I'll sit down and watch like Ancient Aliens for like 12 hours on Netflix. And it's just like, I might as well just be like, what is the drug that they give people in a hospital that I can buy that's legal and I'll still feel creepy for taking it, but I can't get arrested. That's what like Netflix is doing to me. But I could also just close my eyes and listen to a podcast, but I maybe, again, now I'm like outing myself. I don't do that. But how do you make audio this once again art form that requires your full attention, or maybe doesn't even require it, but just brings your full attention to it the same way that like going to a theater does, or in the same way that like watching a movie does? Because it's very rare that someone's like, oh, I got the Born Identity, and I'm going to throw a party, and we're going to watch the Born Identity while we like play the party. While we play the party. So anyway, I keep thinking about how phones are that, and like if Varese were alive now, or if John Cage were alive now, I think he would own like 45 phones. I don't think he'd be like, fuck these phones are bullshit. I think he'd be like, what? How can I make these phones that just, the same way that like radios were just broadcasting ads. Like, how can I make radios a viable instrument? How can I make phones a viable thing? And how can I take phones, which we're not going to be handing out at the concert, the audience is providing them. How do you take the audience and make them the performance? How can you make a piece of art that's not going to be the same every time, but it's still going to have the same macro structure? And how can you have people do it that doesn't require a venue for it? How can people meet at anywhere they want and put something on and have it still be this like digestible piece of art that can be talked about with other people who've done it in the past or people who have never done it before, and have a set of expectations so it's not just like, oh, I open the app and it just blinks different every time. But how can you make something, and how can you think about the phone as a unit of a performance rather than an individual floating computer, but part of like a large integrated network, maybe like a World Wide Web. But how do you think about these devices, and what can you make with a phone now in, or let's say next year in 2015 that you couldn't make in 1985, the same way that you couldn't make music that required a sampler in 1965 and you could in 1985. What shift in all of the art forms, or what new divergent art form, now we're going up, we're not following this line, we're going that way. What shift can you make with a phone? What kind of new pieces of the old art forms can you cobble together into this new sort of like art form that's going to suck for like 20 or 30 years? Because like imagine like the first 30 years of poetry, like you basically don't know all the words, they don't exist yet, and you're just getting together and you're like rock, kick. People are like, that's fucking great, man. And like when music, like when you'd be like, I'm really just going on a tangent. I often think like, what came first? Was it singing or was it rhythm? Was it someone like just like going like, hey dude, come here? And so I was like, could you say that like again? I'm gonna just go like, hey dude, come here at the same time. And they were like, this is awesome. Did you guys hear that? We're gonna call it singing, and it's great. Because people are like, well, birds are always singing. But I don't think if something's always around you that you would really appreciate it. The same way that like your heart is always beating, there's always rhythm inside. There's always rhythm inside us. But I don't think it would be appreciated. I think it literally had to be discovered. I think someone was like, hold on, check this out. And it keeps going. And be like, what do you mean it keeps going? Doesn't it ever go like... So this is only interesting to me, obviously. But for probably like thousands of years, music music and poetry just sucked, just terribly, and they do again. But how did it go into this realm where it was refined and embraced? And I guess this is why I keep thinking about the phone, and I keep thinking like, it would be awesome if in 40 years we went to basketball courts and just sat and watched the other side of the basketball court, and there weren't any performers. And it was like, are you going to the new Brian Eno's Lakers? Brian Eno's doing a thing with the Lakers, and the Lakers aren't going to be there. But and neither's Brian Eno. There's in fact, we're not going to watch anything but us. And you have to bring your phone. They'll have these charging stations, or maybe phones just charge through the air, or it's all contact lenses now. Hopefully it is. Hopefully it's not, but let's get real. It's obviously going that way. They didn't patent this curved glass for like curved phones. That would be ridiculous. Anyway, so I think it's important to always be thinking about, especially as I get older, I'm going to go over to this one, that people that are 5 years younger than me are always going to be trying to destroy me. That's like ultimately their goal. And it was my goal when I was 5 years younger than them, and I'm actively doing it. It's that famous John Waters quote where it's like, don't rebel against your parents, rebel against the cool kids 5 years older than you. And it's the most horrifying and true quote in the world. And if you really want to get super depressed, check out the younger than Rihanna hashtag on Tumblr, or what was it, 89 plus? Is that what it is? This horrifying movement where if you were born after 1989, you're like the only people who can actually comprehend what it's like to develop your self of self in the post-internet age, where like before you had the mental capacity to know what self is, you had already had it destroyed by the internet. So anyone who was born before 1989 thinks in a completely different way, and their brains are actually structured differently. but I can't think of a less sustainable model for being cool than being really young, because it doesn't last at all for anybody. But it works really great for marketing, so it's getting embraced really heavily. But I can't remember what I was talking about, which is nothing anyway. So does anyone know what time it is? 5 minutes. This is great. Okay. So if we can just put both our hands in the air as high as they could possibly get one more time. And if we could all stand up. And I've never done this with chairs, but let's close our eyes and let's put our feet. Imagine like there's like we have another head and it's severed and in between our feet. And imagine you're holding it with your feet so that it can't really you don't want to lose it. But can we just like slowly rotate clockwise, and our head's between our feet, the other head, the head that we're very scared of because we don't know how we found it. Like imagine like two little U's came in and we're like, don't worry, we killed the other one. And all right, so let's just we're rotating at our own speed. And now I'm going to go a little faster so I can cheat. And all right, let's just stop and let's open our eyes. And now just point directly at somebody. And now, if you have room, can you put the same foot as your hand? Let's put that foot like a foot back. That was like the least articulate way to describe what I'm talking about. Can we slowly take one knee down on the ground? This is the least popular section of the Max Fun Con. And now can we find somebody in the room who's not doing this? And can we point directly at that person? And can we, the collective, celebrate the individual?